On today's episode of Farm Connections, host Dan Hoffman travels to Waseca, Minnesota to learn how agriculture is providing a natural alternative to red dye number 40 with the help of AURI. Julie Grossman from the University of Minnesota shares how cover crops can play an important role in farming operations. Thiesse clarifies the formula for ag risk coverage payments, and Lynn Ketelsen explores the growing wine industry. Stay with us. Farm Connections is next.
Welcome to Farm Connections with your host, Dan Hoffman.
Farm Connections, sponsored by Alcorn Clean Fuel, a farmer-owned cooperative in Claremont, Minnesota, celebrating 20 years of producing ethanol, high-protein livestock feed and corn oil, and beverage-grade carbon dioxide for resale to benefit its members and their communities. Absolute Energy, a locally owned facility, produces 115 million gallons of ethanol annually, proudly supporting local economies in Iowa and Minnesota. Absolute Energy, adding value to the neighborhood. Prow Company, a hands-on commercial property leasing company, leasing commercial properties in Rochester, Minnesota since 1952. Realtors and brokers welcome. Prow Company.
With me on Farm Connections today is Julie Grossman from the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Dan.
Well, what do you do at the University of Minnesota?
Yeah, so I'm a faculty member in the Department of Horticultural Science, kind of a new faculty member. I'm from Minnesota originally, but have come back after about 11 years to become a faculty member in a department that looks mostly at vegetable systems, and I am a soil scientist in that department. So I work with organic cropping systems within that department.
More research, more teaching.
I'm a 50-50 split, so I'm 50% in the classroom with our undergraduate students and 50% in research.
Well, specifically today, we want to hear about cover crops.
Great.
What's going on with cover crops?
Yeah, so cover crops are a really hot topic today. Cover crops, you can define them as crops that are fit into a cropping system either spatially or temporally, so between already existing crops that are growing in the field, or temporally before or after cash crops to help provide soil benefits. So many of these crops are grasses, such as rye, but also are legumes. That is what I study in my research.
Well, grass is similar to what's in our front lawn, perhaps, but
right.
What's a legume all about?
So a legume is a specific type of crop that carries out this really cool process called nitrogen fixation, where it works in relationship with bacteria in the soil called rhizobia, and the rhizobia actually fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, where they're taking nitrogen that can't be used by plants because it's in the wrong form in the air, and changes it into the right form where the legume can then use it for its own growth and production. So that nitrogen then is trapped in the leaves of that legume plant, and when you terminate the legume or you kill the legume, such as you would if you had a cover crop, that nitrogen then becomes available in the soil to other crops that are not legumes. So it's really quite amazing. The crop works with this bacteria to take nitrogen from the air and turn it into a free fertilizer for our crops.
Probably that impacts the carbon footprint a little bit.
It can, yep. So you have cover crops. All plants actually are made of carbon and nitrogen as some of their primary nutrients, and the carbon that's contained in those cover crops, when you return that biomass, that tissue from the legume back to the soil, the carbon is also returned. So you can have increases in soil carbon, or what other people might call soil organic matter, when you return all that material, all that legume tissue back to the soil after it's grown and gotten nice and big. So you can have some really great improvements in both nitrogen in your soil that's available to your cash crops, as well as carbon.
And I'm thinking I don't have to truck nitrogen in.
And you don't have to truck nitrogen in. So many farmers are starting to become interested in this alternative system of using legumes as cover crops because of the nitrogen benefit and because of the carbon benefit. And if you can grow enough of the legume, which we can talk about the challenges of that in a minute, but if you can grow enough of it, you can sometimes have enough in that biomass, in that tissue of the plant, to meet the needs of your cash crop once that legume tissue is decomposed by microbes or microorganisms in the soil.
Well, what are the challenges?
Yeah, there are a few of them. So, I can stand up here and talk about legume cover crops and how great they are, but the real truth in Minnesota is that we have a lot of challenges with trying to get enough of that biomass, get that plant big enough So when we kill it, we have a lot of the nitrogen to turn back into the soil and release it for cash crops. So one of the primary challenges is that many times farmers keep their cash crops, such as their corn, in the field fairly late into the fall, and by the time the corn comes off, it's too late to get that legume started. So many people would want to take advantage of that wintertime season, right, to grow the legume. But if you don't get the legume planted until October, it won't survive the winter. So you can do that in the south, in the southern part of the United States, but in our region, it's challenging to be able to get that cover crop in the ground early enough so that it can start to grow in the fall, go dormant in the winter, and then in the spring still be there living and start to put on some biomass and some growth so you can kill it and get that nitrogen returned to the soil before you plant your cash crop again in the summer.
Would there be some differences? I think you mentioned the temporal versus interspatial.
Yeah, so most farmers, when they work with cover crops, they're doing it in the temporal way. So they are, say, trying to take advantage of times during the season when you don't have a crop in the ground. But in Minnesota, those times are very short. So mostly farmers are interested in trying to make that work. So maybe planting a legume in the spring after you've had a winter, it's warm enough to get the cover crop seed planted, and you might just get a little bit of growth before you have to kill that cover crop and get your summer crop in. But sometimes something is better than nothing, and you can get a little bit even by providing a spring planted cover crop to your system rather than just keeping the land bare. Because when you keep the land bare, you have soil losses with snow melt, you can have runoff into nearby waterways of that soil and the nitrogen that is in it. And so having that soil covered at all times is useful, even if you don't have enough time to really put on a lot of growth on that crop.
Well, I'm thinking about in the spring when we need to wash our windows on our house or looking at the windowsills, and sometimes there's some soil there. It had to come from somewhere.
That's right.
Would cover crops impact that?
Yeah, so that idea of having that ground covered and having that soil held in place with the roots of an actively growing crop is very important. Because when you do have rainfall or wind erosion where that soil is being blown away, you think about it, if you have the land covered with a crop, a cover crop, you keep that soil in place, so it's less likely to be lost.
Well, when that cover crop's out there, and at the end of the termination of its growing cycle, it does some things besides nitrogen fixation, I'm guessing. What does it do for soil tilth?
So for soil tilth, so I should back up and say that cover crops there are a lot of different purposes or reasons that farmers may want to use a cover crop. So we have grasses, we have legumes. We talked about the nitrogen benefit of the legumes, but there are other cover crops that are being used specifically to help break up, say, hard pan soils or really compacted soils. Like there's something called the tillage radish that you can plant, and it's a daikon radish. Really, it's just a big, thick white root that is so powerful when it grows that it will help break up compacted zones pretty deep into the soil. And then when that big root breaks apart, it decomposes, and often with winter kill, it will start to decompose. Then you've added that carbon back to the soil. So it helps improve soil organic matter or carbon in your soil, but it also, because it has that big thick root, can help break apart compacted zones you might have in your field.
Improving drainage and aeration.
And improving drainage and aeration, absolutely.
And probably yields. You've done some research probably about economic advantages?
Yeah, and it's tricky with that, with trying to fit that legume into a very short season we have in the fall, before it gets too cold for that cover crop to grow. And a lot of the economic benefit you would get from a legume is really resulting from the free nitrogen that you're getting from the air. So we talked about this process of nitrogen fixation, and when you have a legume that's basically sucking the nitrogen from the air, trapping it in its leaves, it's a free new form of nitrogen. So it is a fertilizer source. So if you're replacing some of the fertilizers that you might be otherwise purchasing with legume fertilizer, it's a win. You can really get some good bang for your buck. But that buck, of course, is coming where you pay for the seed and the labor and the management of that cover crop. So you can get a lot of nitrogen, but the trade-off is you have to grow it for a significant amount of time to get a fair amount of nitrogen from it to help feed your cash crop.
What kind of reception are you getting from the farm community?
It's huge right now, and what's really exciting, I work in organic farming systems specifically, but what's really exciting to me is that many conventional and organic growers are becoming excited about using legume cover crops and all cover crops really in their system. So getting the ground covered during the winter, avoiding those losses we talked about in the spring from wind or snow melt runoff. So I feel like it's really taking root, so to speak, and there's a lot more research that needs to be done. One of the research areas that's being explored right now at the University of Minnesota is interseeding the legume into a standing corn crop. So in the summertime, you might want to plant your cover crop earlier to let it put on some growth before winter comes, but you can't, right, because you have corn in the fields. So there's some researchers at the University of Minnesota are exploring interseeding, so getting that seed into a standing corn crop early, say late summer, and when the corn comes off, the legume is already there, and it can grow a little bit more in the fall, and then it'll sit dormant all winter and be ready to go in the spring when it gets warm enough. So many farmers are toying around with these new technologies. There are a lot of field days taking place so farmers can come observe what's happening at the university, and I'd really want to encourage farmers that might be watching today to think about attending some of those field days, because that's where a lot of the innovations and research are being demonstrated.
And how do they find out about those field days? Is there a website that they can research?
Yeah, often, so local branches of organizations like Land Stewardship Project, for example, have informational bulletins that they send out, or their website would have good information. Probably your local extension agents would be able to inform you in some of those field days as well. They're coming from a number of different sources, so that there's not really one source, but there are a lot of them out there.
Thank you. How about at the University of Minnesota, the research plots? Anything there?
A lot there. Yeah, we actually have a couple students here at the conference today that are presenting their graduate research, which is really exciting. We've been looking a little bit at this concept of strip tillage in vegetable systems. So the idea of planting between actively growing cover crops, planting your cash crops, in this case vegetables, between cover crops that we don't need to terminate early in the spring. We let them grow a little bit longer between these producing rows of, say, peppers, and then we can cut them mid-season and put that legume tissue back onto the cash crop row, the pepper row, to bring that nitrogen back into the soil as it decomposes, as that plant decomposes.
Shirley, keep up the good work on research.
Thank you very much,
we need
Dan.
it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Stay tuned for more on Farm Connections.
Thanks, Dan. Prior to the 2014 crop year, most corn and soybean producers in the upper Midwest that were enrolled in the USDA farm program became quite accustomed to receiving annual direct payments of approximately $20 to $25 per crop base acre. These payments were set by preset formulas that were the same throughout the United States and did not vary much from year to year. However, beginning with the 2014 crop year, there are no longer guaranteed farm program payments, and any payments are based on the level of the national average crop prices as well as annual county crop yields. This has resulted in farm program payments being much more unpredictable from year to year. 90% of the crop producers are currently enrolled in what's called the ARC County program on their corn and soybean base acres for the 2014 through 2018 crop years. These payments are based on national average market prices as well as county average yields. There are no guaranteed annual farm program payments, and payments can vary considerably from year to year and from county to county. Payments are made when the actual county revenue for a crop in a given year fall below the county benchmark revenue guarantee, which is the county FSA yield times the national market year average price. These payments are paid in October in the year after the crop is produced. For corn and soybeans, the market year average price is the national average local sales price from September 1st in the year the crop is harvested until the following August 31st. Prices are then weighted at the end of the year based on the volume of bushels sold in each month. Farm operators in the upper Midwest earned a significant 2014 corn ARC County payment in October of 2015, Well, farm operators in some counties also earned a substantial 2014 ARC County payment on their soybean base acres. Even though corn and soybean price levels have been lower for the 2015 crop year, the 2015 corn and soybean payments in the upper Midwest will be much more variable due to the very strong 2015 corn and soybean yield levels in many counties. The current farm program formulas are quite complicated to understand and very difficult to predict from year to year. This variability creates challenges for farm operators, landowners, and ag lenders. From 2007 to 2013, farm program payments were not a significant factor in profitability on crop farms. However, for the current year as well as for the next few years, these payments will be much more important in farm financial planning. This has been Kent Thiesse, and we'll talk to you next time.
We traveled to Waseca, Minnesota to the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute facilities. And with me today is Senior Project Strategist Michael Sparby.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to the show, and thanks for welcoming us to your office and labs.
I was going to say, welcome to Waseca, and welcome to AURI.
I understand recently you started some research on red dye 40. What's the research about and why?
Yeah, red dye number 40 is a petroleum-based colorant, a red colorant, and some people are adversely affected by that red dye. So we worked with a group of producers that were growing purple corn. The original intent was a natural insecticide. Realized that the purple corn could be a perfect colorant. And now they're in the marketplace and working with companies to replace red dye number 40.
Well, that's fascinating in itself, and perhaps part of your work is helping people understand the economics of projects they bring to you, and maybe you find alternative uses maybe they didn't intend?
Exactly. A lot of times a client will come in with very determined notion of what they want. And what we try to do is figure out, okay, where do you want to be? And how can we get there? And a lot of times what they thought was the path was actually more of a detour to get to that end goal.
Well, if red dye number 40 is a petroleum-based product, and you've got something that's organic or perhaps natural, what's your research showing?
The market specific to the red dye number 40 is about a $2 billion market. The natural market within that is actually probably about $500 million. So there's a lot of room to play specifically for that product.
Well, this is a big economic impact, but it sounds like also our consumers or the people using products that are dyed would really like to have you come up with an alternative to what they're using now.
Exactly. Yeah, we do quite a bit of work in the food area. Food area right now is the hottest area that we have as far as activity. And over the years it cycles. So if you would have asked me what the hottest area was 3 years ago, I would have said bio-based products. And if you would have asked me what the hottest area was 6 years ago, I would have said renewable energy. But depending on what the outside forces are, given, for example, as soon as the petroleum prices dropped and natural gas prices dropped, renewable energy kind of went away, mainly because of the economics. It was very difficult to get the economics to pencil out.
Michael, you said bio-based. What do you mean by that?
Bio-based would be essentially a displacement of petroleum-based products. So if you're looking at displacing plastics with bio-based products, that bio-based product would be a PLA or a polylactic acid made from corn. So you'd be able to replace the petroleum-based plastic with that bio-based plastic.
And even though you've downsized a little bit on the renewables, that's renewable.
Exactly.
Can you give me an example of a product that maybe you have helped develop that's in the grocery store?
Yeah, an example that you'd see kind of day to day would be food packaging within the grocery store. There's not all of them, but there's some of the food packaging that is corn-based.
Tell us about some other products and projects you have going on.
Sure. A really fun one was when Al called me up where he had a client come in with coffee bean chaff. He was a roaster. Java Cycle is the name of the company. He had this coffee bean chaff that was a waste product, and he wanted to do something with it. And part of our mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. And we don't grow coffee in Minnesota. So it didn't really fit our mission. But once we sat down with the client, we were able to assess what his ultimate needs were. We were able to mix in some Minnesota agricultural commodities and be able to move that product forward, develop it, and into the marketplace.
Nice. And you talked earlier a little bit about another product that actually involves soybean meal.
Yeah, we worked with collaboration with the Minnesota soybean growers, taking a look at assessing the use of a lower sugared soybean meal and a lower sugared, higher protein soybean meal. And we did some collaboration with the soybean growers with the University of Minnesota on feed trials. We distributed that information to industry. A company in southwestern Minnesota grabbed onto that information and really moved it forward as far as developing a product, built the plant, and that soybean meal is now commercially available.
About how long would it take from the concept to the final product when it moves through your labs?
Good question. It varies. If you take a look at the coffee bean example, that was one that was fairly quick. We were able to move that from concept to product in about a 6-month time frame. If we take a look at the soybean meal example, that was a multi-year venture. And by the time the plant was built, it was probably about 3 to 5 years for that whole project to develop.
Huge contribution for time, but also leverage to a huge reward.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Nicely done. It's beginning to sound like this is the place to come for collaboration and network because of the resources you have.
We do. That I think is, one of our huge assets is our laboratories and our scientists and the knowledge that they bring. The other huge resource is the collaborations and the networks that we've developed over the years.
If a consumer or a person watching this show wants to learn more on how to connect with you and do some research, how would they find out about you and where do they connect with you?
Easiest place to connect with us is through our website, which would be AURI.org, and phone number and or email, and be either connected directly with me or some other staff.
Great information. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for coming.
Stay tuned for more Farm Connections.
The wine industry has become an important part of agricultural production in the United States, with over 9,000 wineries and growing at a rate of over 4% each year. And now there are wineries in all 50 states. Why the increase and what's the attraction? Ray Winter is the owner of Indian Island Winery in Janesville, Minnesota.
Wine is a really popular item. People love wine. You know, you don't go out and drink in the bars a lot anymore, but everybody goes out to eat. It's nice to sit down and have a glass of wine with your meal. Go out for a couple hours, sit at a winery, enjoy a couple glasses of wine, a little food, and go home for the evening. You know, it's just the way society is driven nowadays.
Winter says they cater to a variety of customers, but most are local residents.
I think they really realize when they get out in the vineyard and they see all the grapes hanging there and they see the care we put, how much work is involved with getting that bottle of wine on the shelf. I mean, just in the raising end of it, not to mention all the part that my daughter does in the actual production room to make the wine. But they really enjoy that, and they do feel connected with it.
Winter gives a lot of credit to the growth of wineries in the northern areas to the University of Minnesota.
And part of the drive for that has been the University of Minnesota has developed cold hardy grapes that make good wine. I mean, really great wine, in fact. And without that happening, we were pretty limited what we could draw up here to make nice wine.
The winery owner was a corn and soybean farmer. Now he says the winery is his farm.
I farmed all my life, and everybody says, well, what are you farming now? And I said, I farm grapes. I just don't farm corn and beans anymore, but I still farm. It's farming in every sense of the word.
With the emphasis in agriculture nowadays on locally produced and natural produce, it's no wonder that wineries have been growing and popping up all over the country. It's an opportunity for those who enjoy wine to interact with the people that are producing it, and an opportunity for entrepreneurs to start and grow a new business. This is Lynn Ketelsen reporting.
Thanks for joining us on Farm Connections. I'm your host, Dan Hoffman, and I look forward to seeing you next time.